Hello everyone, DonTheCrown here, and today I want to talk about the crafting in the Slormancer because I think this has some of the best ARPG crafting that I've ever experienced. It's just super duper fun, very straightforward. You don't really need a PhD or a Wikipedia page in order to figure out what's going on. I was going to go through it and kind of talk about it. Now, the first thing I get a question about quite a bit is as you're leveling up, how frequently should you be replacing gear? Because gear does scale with the item level of it, which scales based off the monster level. And so I'd recommend like every 10 to 20 levels that you replace gear. And you can either find it on the ground or you can talk to Gemma, the gold prospector here. Now, she does have kind of a equipment sale shop where you can buy a whole bunch of different stuff. Or you can go and do the random container, which will give you a random piece of loot. Basically, you get an option here, and you're just going to pick anything really here that is of the slot that you want. The stats really don't matter all that much. It's more about the rarity. I would recommend that you like start off with at least a blue or rare piece of gear in order to kind of like get a good experience there. And then all you have to do is go over here to the blacksmith and you can start crafting. Now, when you're crafting gear, it is pretty darn straightforward to be able to just see exactly what you are currently crafting on the left and what you're currently wearing. So if you're replacing a piece of gear, it's very easy to know exactly kind of like what you're looking for and what like stats you want to roll again if you're trying to one-to-one replace. Now, one thing that's really important to note is that the higher up on a piece of gear a stat is, the higher rolls that it can have. Now, some stats aren't going to appear everywhere, but typically its base stats are going to have higher rolls than defensive stats, and then defensive stats will have higher rolls than both magic and rare. So it's like tier 1 base, tier 2 defense, tier 3 magic and rare, and then tier 4 is kind of your epic stats, which have like a whole wide range of rolls of things that you normally can't get, but they have a lot lower range for stats that you can have. So for example, here on belt, we can see all of the different options here that we could get. We can get flat raw damage, for example, on the belt here as a base stat. And if I roll down here to a magic stat for that, the flat roll is 687 top end, whereas on the the base stat, it is 1057. So it's really important that you think about what it is that you want for your stat for each slot and kind of just have like a good idea what you're looking for, which is why it's so helpful that you can just see the stats that you had before on your previous item. You really don't have to kind of think about this like once or twice, and then you're kind of just like create a similar item as you go. Now, when you're on a crafting option here, anything that's going to change should be highlighted in orange so we can see that the base stat numbers are going to be rolled here. If I go to Reforge all scores, it's only the numbers that are going to change, and then clicking this button will only change the numbers. It won't change what the actual stat is. Going down to Reforge normal stats will show me all of the possible outcomes for this, and most importantly, it will show me what like I already have pity against. So if I roll this, I'm looking for movement speed. You'll notice that one of the options is gray. That's what we currently have. And the orange ones are ones that we have already rolled in this particular session. And so we can't hit that again. So that I know that eventually we're going to hit movement speed. We hit movement speed here, thankfully not last. And that's really good for us. Now, you can kind of go and roll basically whatever stats that you want on here, line by line. It's pretty cool. Defensive stats are going to have a limited to just defensive stats. Magic stats are always going to be the same as rare stats. They have the exact same values. They have the exact same outcomes that you can possibly get here. And so I just always try to think of like what I want for magic and rare stat in order to kind of think about this. Now, one thing I do want to talk about is that adding stats to an item typically is way more expensive than re-rolling them. So you can see here adding magic stats to this belt is going to cost me 10,000 gold, but then reforging it is only like 500. And so this is why you want to start with at least a blue piece of gear, because it's going to be a lot easier to roll those stats around. And like as you go down the item here, adding epic stats can cost 245,000, which is just kind of ridiculous. And so I don't really typically add epic stats while I was leveling up too much, mostly because a lot of these things are, it's kind of like a crapshoot if you're going to get something good, and like adding this and re-rolling it is just very expensive. So I just really recommend focusing on the top 4 stats for the most part in the very beginning, but then eventually you can go and get yourself an epic piece of gear, either by adding it, and you just kind of can roll things around. Now, a couple things that I do recommend is that when you decide that, hey, I want to go and reforge the scores so that these are closer to perfect, which is something you should do, you want to make sure that you're reforging from the very, very top of the item, from the reforge all scores option. And the reason you want to do this is because it's way cheaper than any other option here. This is only going to cost 1 fate and 184 gold. If I went down to epic stats and I was like, reforge the scores here, it costs 1 fate, 1 epic, and 1,100 gold. And it only rolls the epic stats, which is just kind of silly. What you can do is if you, once you get a roll that is good, you can just lock that roll. And so I locked this critical strike damage here, and now this value cannot get changed in any way, shape, or form while it is locked. So I can reforge all of the scores. And typically what I'll do is I'll kind of set in my mind like what I want for each breakpoint here. But like, I want 9.5 movement speed. I want like 820 elemental res, yada, yada, yada. And I will just kind of roll until I get what I want. And if I get something that is good, like this 4% increase area effect, I'll go lock it. And so eventually the finished piece of gear kind of looks like you see on the right here, where almost all of the stats are locked in and we are kind of just rolling the last couple of stuff. Obviously, if stats aren't super duper important for your build, you can kind of like be a little bit less particular with them, especially from endgame gear. I want it to be very close to perfect because, you know, that's important to me. Now, one other thing you can do with re-rolling is the legendary as well. You can actually, if you have a legendary, it's a lot cheaper to reforge the legendary effect. It's going to cost you 1 legendary Slormancer, like 68,000 gold here. This will change the waist guard of the warlock here to like any other random legendary belt, which is just pretty cool. And so if you have a legendary that's of the slot of something that you want, it's a lot better to re-roll that piece than trying to level up a, you know, non-legendary into a legendary. And so we can see here that adding a legendary effect would cost me like 1.4 million gold, which is kind of crazy. Next up, also you can level up items as well. So let's say like I've had this belt like from level 50. I could just continue to level this up, especially if this has a lot of good epic stats that I want, just by using the Slormancer of True Potential. You can craft these and all of the other things here in the merge fragment section. You can craft 1, 3, or all. I don't recommend using the all. It kind of uses all your materials up. But yeah, these are relatively easy to get. If you have a nice like epic piece of gear, I think I took this from like level 60. I had a belt that I took from like level 50 all the way to level 100 before I replaced it. And so highly recommend like leveling up gear there as well. Now there's another thing that you can, another 3 things that you can add, which is the stuff that is kind of like at the bottom of the gear, which is Reaper Affinity, your mastery skill, and your attribute score. And Reaper Affinity basically makes you better at using a certain like brand of bow. This is a bow that is by Atorious. I can tell because it says by Atorious on there. This is a Cory Ironbender bow. And like you kind of want to like stack up affinity for whatever bow you're going to be using. Especially like early on, I think Bow of the Trainee is pretty popular. And so stacking Cory Ironbender affinity, if you have this bow, is a pretty good idea, because what affinity does is it will go and give you, wrong person, it will give you a multiplier to the effect of the bow or the weapon. So the Atorious Affinity here, I'm at level 133. You get up to 50 from equipment and up to 100 from upgrading here. So I get 66.5% effect multiplier and 133 Reaper experience gain. If we go to my Cory Ironbender, I only have 77% Reaper experience gain here. And so if I like wanted to like level up that bow to crazy levels, it's not going to go as fast there. So I really highly recommend you getting that for whatever Reaper you plan on using. And then on top of that, going and getting your skill mastery is very important. Void Arrow here, for example, gives you 5% more skill damage per mastery level. Starts off, you can level this up to 15. You can get an additional 22 from gear. 22 times 5, that's like 110% skill damage. That's a stinking lot of damage. So it is pretty important that you get these like maxed out. It's really going to help you out with your damage quite a bit. This is a pretty big multiplier for your build. Lastly, we all know we kind of get these attribute points when we level up. Well, you can get up to 3 points of an attribute on your gear, and just by crafting them on here, and you can like re-roll them around to all of the different stats. I just recommend picking up any stat that you are manually putting points into right now. So for like my particular setup, I think that toughness or savagery or determination or bravery would be just fine, because I'm planning on putting points into these anyways. So might as well, right? And these are like these like light green teal points here. These are not ones that I can unspend. These are ones that are coming from my gear. And yeah, so it's pretty important to have those things. Once again, I wouldn't recommend adding level to this. Now, the other thing that you can do, we talked about this in the previous video, is you can go and remove or extract Slormite. And what this will do is it will take like a +7 on a piece of gear and give you a like rank 6, Slormite type of thing. It kind of goes down in 1 rank. This kind of is useful. Like I have it on my loot filter here to show me things that are higher rank, just so I can extract it. Yeah, that's pretty much it for the basics of gear, except for one thing. And that's pure stats. Pure stats are a system you're going to start running into later in the game. And these are stats that are like higher level than a normal stat. So we can see here we have 2 belts here, like 95, 97, pretty close in range. But if I hold shift here, I can see that my epic belt only goes up to 10. The purple belt goes up quite a bit because it has quite a few ranks of reinforcement, but this one is already 16%, and it goes all the way up to 20%. That's because it's a pure stat, and pure stats are a drop only. You cannot craft these, and importantly, you cannot re-roll these. You see here it says warning, purity will be lost in at least 1 stat. So if I re-roll this, the movement speed would evaporate. So if you're crafting on a piece of gear that has a pure stat, the very first thing you need to do is just go and lock it. So you cannot mess it up, because if you re-roll the value, you re-roll the stat, it will just completely evaporate and it'll go back to being a normal stat. The number of exclamation points tells you how close to perfect it is. So 3 is the highest you're going to see here. This is like a perfect raw stat on my helmet here. It's going to be like 6,374. That's pretty crazy. And endgame is really about finding gear that has pure stats and like leveling up to 100 and then crafting around it. And then we get to Nether Gear. Now, Nether Gear is something you're not going to experience at all until you get to part 3 here of the Adam Nostris trial. And in the Nether world, which is what unlocks, you basically have this giant map here that has like either normal things where you're building up nether charge, which allows you a higher chance to get Nether Gear, or bosses that, based on what your nether charge is, will have a chance to drop purple Nether Gear. And the primordial nether world here will have higher chances. It'll all be level 100. But yeah, that's pretty much like, this is how you're going to get most of your end game purple gear farming. Now, what does Nether Gear do besides just being magnificently purple? Well, a couple different things. These can be leveled up all the way to level 120. And I believe they can start from like level 101 or better. And then they can have up to 3 graphs on them. You can see it says amulet, level 120, graphs 3. And what does that mean? Well, if you look at these boots here, you might notice something really strange right off the bat. It has Goldus Find on it. These are like my gold find boots, but boots normally can't have Goldus Find as their base stat. as we go and we look here, we can go and see that armor, elemental res, evasion, life, max mana, movement speed, or raw damage. Definitely not gold is fine. Well, what you can do with nether things is you can go and put this all over here, and you can graft over 3 stats from any spot on any gear. Anything you want. So if I'm like, hey, I have these boots here that have raw damage, this, very high up raw damage, I'm going to go and I'm going to replace the movement speed here, and we're going to go and put the raw damage on here. That's what you can do. As you can see here, this does scale up with the item level of the Nether Gear. It does scale up with the reinforcement, so that 1284 raw is turning into 6394, which is pretty insane, especially because this is like nearly a max roll. Max roll will be 6491. That's a lot of damage. And so you can do that with anything. So I don't necessarily need to go boot to boot. I could go belt to boot. I could put things on here that you normally can't get. And that is what I did, is I went and I put I think a ring modifier onto my boots to give me more gold is fine. But that's not it. The crazy part is I can go and I can take the legendary stat and I can put the legendary stat onto a different thing. So I can go belts onto my boots, belts on my gloves. I can wear like multiple belt effects basically all over my stuff, or really anything. You're pretty much like wide open cornucopia here of be able to like really pick and choose which legendary effects you want on any piece of gear, and it doesn't really matter what slot it is. So if you're playing a build where like you really want pads of the Drunken Master, but you also want to run other shoulders that give you some other effects, well, you can put the pad of the Drunken Master on your gloves or on your bracers or some other place that doesn't really matter for your build. There's not a good legendary, so you just move it over there. I just think that is so stinking cool. Definitely pretty amazing. Now, one thing I do want to point out is that when you are pushing gear over, it's always going to go same section. So I can only put base stats into my base stats. I can put defensive stats into my defensive stats. I can't put like an epic stat up into my base stat. And it doesn't even have to be a pure stat, but pure stat is pretty important here, which is why on my loot filter, I pretty much just set it up now where it's hiding normal items unless it has a pure stat and a highlighted stat, or it is hitting a certain reinforcement level. And I do that for, all the way up through epic gear right now, because we're just dropping so much gear. What the heck is a highlighted stat? Well, you might have noticed as we're looking at gear that some of the stats are actually yellow. The green is the pure stat. Obviously, the yellow is a stat that I have highlighted. So I've clicked over here on armor, and that pretty much makes it so that that armor becomes highlighted. I've also clicked movement speed. So if I unclick both of those, we can see that the highlight on the belt goes away if there's nothing selected. And this just allows you to very quickly recognize gear in your inventory that has certain stats. While I was leveling up, I had Mana Leech and Life Leech highlighted because I really, really needed those stats. And I didn't really understand that you could easily re-roll for them so much. And so I was just always kind of like keeping an eye out for items that were going to have that stat naturally so I could craft up on it. But yeah, you just really craft anything. And this just kind of helps you with your loot filtering a little bit. I wouldn't necessarily recommend having such a strict loot filter early on because, you don't need that. But this is definitely something that's very good for late game. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the crafting. I think we covered everything. If you need to know about the enhancement stuff, the little cross here at the bottom and how to level up gear, go check out my previous video talking about enhancing. Yeah. Hopefully this video helps you out though. We'll see you guys again soon. Come by the stream, hop on the Discord, ask some questions, and come hang out. Thank you much, guys. Appreciate you.